Have you ever woken up and felt like something was just ... different? Not wrong, not right, just oddly aware? Like your breath had memory, or the light felt like it recognized you. If so, you're not imagining things. You're tuning reality. In this story, we gently follow the quiet unfolding of a deeper truth, that your frequency, your choices, your silent shifts in attention are not passive. They are shaping the world in real time. As your nervous system learns to harmonize with the unseen rhythms of the universe, life stops feeling like something to chase and begins to feel like something you're already inside. So settle in. Let the noise soften. You're not here to figure it all out tonight. You're here to remember something old and intimate, a subtle knowing you've always carried. If you're listening from somewhere quiet, a bedroom in Jakarta, a train in Toronto, or beneath soft blankets in Chicago, welcome. This space is yours. And if you're new here, take a moment to subscribe so you won't miss what unfolds next time. Tonight's story begins in that delicate moment after waking, when time hasn't yet decided what it wants to be. A presence stirs in you, soft and strange, and with it, a signal that maybe, just maybe, this isn't just a new day. It's a new timeline. You woke up differently today. Not dramatically, not with thunder in your ears or visions painted across the ceiling, but subtly, almost shyly, as though the air itself was slightly out of sync with your memories of it. The room looked the same, but felt altered, like a memory that had been gently rewritten while you slept. You paused longer than usual at the edge of your bed. Something in your chest whispered, "Pay attention." And even though you didn't fully know what to look for, you obeyed. That single breath, the one you held just a moment longer than necessary, was the beginning. You didn't know it yet, but that was your signal being tuned. Most people will call this a shift in mood, or perhaps the residue of a dream. But what really changed was not the world, it was the frequency you were emitting. And the world, like any responsive field, adjusted in return. Quantum physics has long whispered that the observer is not separate from the observed, but you are no longer hearing the whisper. You're feeling it in your bones. Your attention is not just passive. It's participatory. Like a tuning fork dropped into still water, your awareness ripples into matter, rearranging possibility. Most won't see this, but you are beginning to. That alone makes you dangerous to the old narrative and sacred to the new one. You might begin noticing time behaving strangely, like it's folding inward during stillness or rushing outward when you're aligned. It feels elastic, reactive, and that's not a delusion. It's a confirmation. When your nervous system stops fighting the pulse of reality and starts listening to it, something ancient wakes up inside your cells. You stop feeling like a victim of experience and begin remembering that you are its co-creator, but not through force, through resonance. A frequency you carry does not push reality, it invites it. An invitation, when truly aligned, becomes inevitable. Lately, maybe you've seen signs, not the kind you look for, but the kind that find you. A lyric finishing a thought you didn't say aloud. A friend reaching out moments after their name crossed your mind. A number repeating until it's no longer coincidence, but conversation. These aren't anomalies. They are proof of resonance, of your inner world becoming legible to the outer one. You're not calling things in through effort. You're syncing with a pre-existing rhythm that was waiting for your attention to match it. You're not making alignment happen. You're hearing it. And by hearing it, you become part of it. It begins to affect your choices too, but not in dramatic declarations. Instead, in tiny, almost invisible moments. You pause before replying to someone's irritation. You feel the edge of fear and don't react to it. You sense a lie forming in your throat and choose silence instead. These choices, uncelebrated by the world, unnoticed by most, are enormous shifts in your vibrational pattern. They're not about morality. They're about coherence. And coherence is the most magnetic force in the universe. When you stabilize in it, you don't chase experiences. You change the probability field that governs which experiences arrive. Even your body starts to speak differently. Your breath becomes less about survival and more about sensing. Your heartbeat slows not from laziness, but from alignment. The tension in your shoulders begins to ease, not because life got easier, but because your signal stopped resisting itself. The body was never designed to be separate from the field. It's the field's most intimate instrument. And as your emotional landscape recalibrates, your body begins transmitting clearer signals, not just to people, but to the probabilities that surround you. It's not that manifestation is fake. It's that it was never about wanting. It was always about vibrating. Relationships shift too, not always gently. Some fall away like dry leaves, not because they were bad, but because they were tuned to a version of you that no longer exists. Others arrive as if from nowhere, soul mirrors, energetic companions, guides disguised as new friends. They don't come to complete you. They come because you stopped negotiating with your authenticity. And in that raw clarity, you became visible to others who were waiting for the same frequency. You didn't signal them with words. You signaled them with your being. And what of the past? It doesn't vanish, but it softens. Old stories begin to unravel, not because you dissected them, but because your nervous system no longer believes. They're relevant. Trauma, shame, guilt. They stop being central commands and start becoming gentle echoes. You're not escaping them. You're outgrowing their gravity. And in that space, ancestral memories begin to surface, not to haunt you, but to be rewritten through you. You start healing not just your own thread, but the weave behind you. You become the signal that corrects what came before. There is a strange grace in this. A sense that you're not improving life, you're inhabiting it, fully, nakedly, without apology. Your dreams shift from fantasy to blueprint. Your thoughts become quieter, more intentional. You don't rush decisions. You feel them. You don't seek permission. You listen for resonance. This is not laziness. This is intelligence. You're no longer reacting to a world of scarcity. You're responding to a field of abundance. And the difference is night and day. You might begin sensing things before they happen. A conversation that's already blooming in your chest before the phone rings. A decision that makes itself known before logic catches up. This is not psychic trickery. This is alignment. The closer you rest inside your true frequency, the more porous time becomes. The future doesn't come toward you. You expand into it. And the future that matches your signal is the one that crystallizes. All others flicker and fade. The world still moves around you. It will still challenge you. But even your understanding of challenge transforms. You begin to see friction not as punishment, but as calibration. Resistance becomes a question. Are you sure about this frequency? And when you are, even chaos becomes cooperation. You don't escape difficulty. You repurpose it. You compost pain into clarity. You let endings become altars. Every wound becomes a portal when your frequency is coherent enough to hold it without flinching. Even silence changes. It stops being empty. It becomes charged, electric, generative. You stop filling it with distractions. You start listening to what lives beneath it, and what you find is not absence, it's instruction. In silence, the field speaks in patterns, and your nervous system, no longer addicted to noise, finally hears the song. It's been there all along, waiting for you to stop humming the tune of fear. You're not waiting for miracles. You're becoming the conditions that allow them to occur. And in this shift, effort fades. Not because you stop doing, but because Your doing becomes unforced. Flow returns, not as a reward, but as a side effect of truth. And in this truth, you find rest, not the rest of sleep, but the rest of alignment. You're not exhausted anymore because you're no longer swimming against yourself. And now you might be wondering, if this is possible, if this is happening, then what else is waiting? What else has been quietly orbiting your field, waiting for your signal to call it in? The answer is, everything you were designed to receive, but were too distorted to hold. It's not a fantasy. It's physics. And you've only just begun. There comes a point when you stop asking if you're imagining things, because the evidence of resonance grows louder than doubt. Patterns emerge not in logic, but in intimacy. You notice that when you speak from your center, things unfold without friction. When you betray yourself, even slightly, the road ahead becomes strangely rough. The world isn't punishing you, it's reflecting you. And more than that, it's learning you. Reality begins to speak your inner language fluently. You're not translating yourself anymore. You're being received. Soon, you no longer chase clarity. You sense it arriving the moment you grow still. Insights no longer require analysis. They arrive as frequency, whole, complete, beyond argument. When you're tuned properly, knowing doesn't shout. It hums. It rests in your bones like a memory you never learned, but always carried. And when others ask, how do you know? You may find yourself gently smiling, not in superiority, but in deep remembrance. There are truths your mind could never prove, but your field knows as fact, and your dreams begin to change. Not just the ones that visit you at night, but the ones you dare to imagine while awake. They stop being projections of what's missing and begin to feel like timelines you're gently touching. You don't chase them, you match them. They're not goals, they're frequencies. And the moment you stabilize, they begin arriving, often disguised as coincidences too precise to ignore. Your dreams were never far. They were just vibrating too quietly for your fear to hear. Even memory becomes a flexible thing. Not because the past is false, but because your frequency reinterprets it. You remember events differently, not through repression, but through reformation. You stop seeing yourself as a victim in those scenes and begin recognizing the intelligence that allowed even pain to serve your unfolding. Forgiveness doesn't become a moral act. It becomes a vibrational necessity. You can't keep carrying low-frequency loops into high-frequency timelines. They collapse under mismatch. Your sense of time further dissolves. The more you align, the more time unravels. Past and future stop being destinations. They start being currents within the same field, all accessible, all reprogrammable, all responsive to signal. You stop asking, when will this happen? And start asking, what signal do I need to become? You're not waiting for time anymore. You're creating the conditions where time reveals what was always folded inside it. And here's where it gets even stranger. You begin sensing others energetically, before they speak, before they arrive. You feel the static in their field before the story on their lips. You hear the dissonance beneath their smile, the truth behind their hesitation. But you don't use this awareness to judge. You use it to respond, not to what they say, but to what their signal reveals. You don't fix them. You meet them where their frequency lives. And sometimes, just by witnessing that quietly, they begin to shift. This isn't mystical arrogance. It's energetic literacy. You're not better than anyone. You're just tuned differently. And your presence becomes an amplifier, not of noise, but of coherence. People around you begin adjusting unconsciously. They feel safer, steadier, more clear, not because you're doing anything to them, but because your stabilized signal reminds their system of its own coherence. It's not manipulation, it's resonance. And it changes everything. Even your creativity reawakens, not as a skill, but as a side effect. When you're no longer spending energy managing fear or chasing approval, creative impulse rushes back, like a long-lost river. Ideas appear whole, images bloom uninvited, words pour through your fingertips with an ease you once thought rare. This isn't inspiration. This is design. You were always meant to create. It was the static that blocked. The current. Now that the noise is quiet, the current returns. You might start feeling more alone, not lonely, but alone in a new way. You sense that fewer people speak your language now. Not because they're gone, but because you've tuned beyond old bandwidths. This solitude is not exile, it's refinement. It's you choosing resonance over reaction, depth over drama. And slowly, those tuned to your frequency begin to appear. Not many, not loud, but unmistakably aligned. They don't fill your silence. They honor it. At times, you'll feel disoriented. It's not regression, it's recalibration. You're shedding layers you didn't know you wore. Thought patterns, emotional loops, identity masks that were necessary once, but obsolete now. This shedding feels strange because you're not replacing what's falling away. You're expanding into what's always been underneath. And that self, the one that needs no performance, is so quiet, so steady, so clear, it almost feels unfamiliar at first. That's how you know it's true. And when you look around, the world hasn't changed, but how you see it has. You notice beauty in previously dull corners. You feel reverence in mundane tasks. You find yourself weeping, not from sadness, but from recognition. You're not romanticizing life. You're finally witnessing it. Undistorted, unfiltered. You're not seeking meaning. You are the meaning. And from that state, everything becomes sacred. You notice that even your challenges evolve. You're still stretched, still tested, but the lessons arrive faster. The suffering is shorter. You catch yourself mid-pattern and choose differently. Without shame, mistakes don't spiral, they clarify. Recovery becomes almost immediate, not because you've become perfect, but because your system is self-correcting now. That's what coherence does. It doesn't prevent collapse. It shortens it. There's a quiet power in knowing that you're not manifesting from desire anymore, but from presence. Wanting loses its urgency. You no longer pray to be rescued. You rest in the knowing that nothing is missing. And from that state of enoughness, things arrive. Not as rewards, but as reflections. Not because you earned them, but because you allowed them. There's no struggle in alignment. There is only readiness. And when fear returns, and it will, you don't resist it. You meet it like an old friend bringing a new lesson. You ask, what are you protecting? And fear, grateful to be acknowledged, shows you the places. Still waiting for light. You don't shame it. You don't banish it. You integrate it. That's what maturity is. Not the absence of fear, but the conscious companionship of it. Your body continues to respond. Foods that once comforted now feel heavy. Environments that once energized now feel dissonant. You're not becoming picky. You're becoming precise. Frequency isn't a preference. It's a necessity. Your cells demand coherence now. Anything less feels unbearable, not because you're fragile, but because you finally remembered what alignment tastes like. And your presence continues to ripple. Conversations become medicine. Eye contact becomes activation. Your silence becomes sanctuary. You no longer need to prove your depth. You simply embody it. And in that embodiment, others feel seen, not for who they pretend to be, but for who they could be if they dared to tune in. The story you tell about yourself begins to dissolve. You no longer narrate your life through wounds. You no longer wear your trauma like a badge. You don't erase the past, but you stop being defined by it. Identity softens. Truth stabilizes. You stop introducing yourself by your scars and begin radiating from your signal. And that signal says, I am not my survival. I am my emergence. And so you walk differently, not arrogantly, but deliberately. You move through rooms without rushing. You speak without defending. You listen without absorbing. Your presence no longer asks to be liked. It invites to be remembered. People feel different around you, not because you've changed them, but because your field reminds them of the one they forgot they carried. There is more, so much more, unfolding now, and it's not coming from outside. It's blooming from within. The intelligence you once outsourced to gurus, to books, to systems, now speaks from your own marrow. You trust your yes. You honor your no. You live in a state of subtle but constant communion, not with doctrine, but with the field. And in this communion, a strange thought arises, quiet and insistent. Maybe I was never meant to find the path. Maybe I was meant to be the path. And somehow, that makes everything make sense. There comes a moment, quiet, unmarked, when you realize you're not searching anymore. The striving has thinned, the urgency dimmed, not because you gave up, but because you finally arrived. Not in a destination sense, but in an embodiment sense. You're no longer chasing reality like a dog behind a cart. You're walking beside it, and sometimes even ahead of it. This feeling is not loud. It doesn't announce itself, but it wraps around you like recognition, like a rhythm you suddenly remember how to dance to. This is when you begin to notice the stillness beneath everything. Not silence, stillness. The pulse beneath sound, the breath beneath thought. It doesn't require effort to find. It requires permission. And when you give yourself that permission, to pause, to soften, to truly listen, that stillness becomes your teacher. It doesn't speak in words. It speaks in knowing. And in that knowing, your decisions become clean, not because you're always certain, but because you're anchored. You don't ask, what's the right thing? You ask, what's the resonant thing? You no longer measure progress by productivity. You measure it by presence. Did you stay with yourself in that difficult moment? Did you breathe before reacting? Did you listen without preparing your defense? That's alignment. That's evolution. You begin to understand that the universe doesn't grade on performance. It responds to signal. And the clearer your signal, the more accurate the reflection. That's not karma. That's coherence. You start to feel when you're not in your signal. It's subtle. A tightening in the chest, a fuzziness in thought, a feeling like walking through fog. You don't panic. You simply adjust. Like a musician retuning between songs, you pause, recalibrate, and return. And every time you return, it's easier. The gap shortens. The fall softens. Because you've built a home in your frequency. And now you know the way back with your eyes closed. Your perception of others continues to refine. You stop reacting to their roles, the parent, the lover, the boss, the skeptic. You see beneath all that. You sense the architecture of their becoming. You recognize the frozen child behind their anger, the hidden grief behind their control. And rather than try to fix them, you witness them. And in that witnessing, something sacred happens. They begin to thaw. Even your sense of language evolves. You speak less to explain and more to invite. Words become instruments of resonance. You no longer fill silence out of discomfort. You use silence as a tuning fork. People feel it. They don't always understand it, but they feel it. And in that space, new conversations are born. Not of surface talk, but of soul signal. You begin to notice your life organizing itself differently. The jobs, the places, the foods, the thoughts, they begin to shift without grand decisions. You don't force these changes. They become inevitable. When your frequency stabilizes, anything out of tune begins to fall away. Sometimes gently, sometimes dramatically, but always with purpose. Not because you're better, but because you're no longer vibrating at the level of distortion. Money, too, begins to change its nature. It stops feeling like survival fuel and starts feeling like signal support. You stop using it to prove worth. You start directing it toward coherence. What you invest in reflects your values. What you allow in reflects your frequency. You don't chase abundance. You harmonize with it. And in that harmony, enough always seems to arrive. You may still meet resistance, inside and out. The world doesn't suddenly become free of challenge, but your posture toward challenge changes. You stop seeing resistance as a stop sign and start seeing it as a tuning opportunity. Each friction becomes feedback, not of failure, but of refinement. Am I still aligned? You ask softly. And if the answer is no, you don't punish yourself. You realign. That's mastery, not perfection, but response. This is when legacy whispers its name. Not legacy in the sense of fame or monuments, but the quiet, ongoing impact of a coherent life. You realize your presence is your offering. Your healing is ancestral. Your attention alters timelines. You may never see the full ripple, but you feel it, and that's enough. You become medicine. Not because you try to be, but because your frequency leaves space for others to remember themselves. Dreams return, but differently now. They're not escape routes. They're guidance. Their frequencies arriving as imagery. You don't need to decode them linearly. You feel their tone. You receive their texture. Your dreams don't need to make sense. They need to make resonance. And you wake up not with answers, but with clarity. That's the gift of alignment, insight without effort. Eventually, you stop trying to teach. You stop trying to convince. You stop needing to be right. You realize your presence does more than your preaching ever could. You don't shrink. You don't shout. You tune. And the world bends toward it. Not because you control it, but because reality trusts coherence. And you trust it too. You trust the timing, the slowness, the pauses. You stop measuring yourself against other people's noise. You start feeling your own pace, your own pulse, your own quiet arrival. And from that place, you walk into every room like you belong there. Not out of arrogance, but out of vibrational memory. You remember yourself, and the room remembers you. There is nothing to prove. There is only presence. You are not here to climb. You are here to attune. And every time you do, every time you return to your core frequency, no matter how briefly, the world adjusts, just slightly. Possibilities bend, timelines shift. You don't see it right away, but eventually you live in a world that feels like your reflection. You begin to love more quietly, not because you care less, but because your love is no longer performance. It's atmosphere. You walk beside others without dragging them, without fixing them, without losing yourself. And in that love, you give the greatest gift, a mirror with no distortion, a presence with no agenda, a resonance that says, you are already enough. And in the softest moment, the deepest insight lands, you realize you've been creating reality this whole time, not by effort, not by thought, but by frequency. And now that you're aware, you choose more carefully. You breathe more intentionally. You love more steadily, not because you're trying, but because it's who you are without distortion. There will still be days of forgetting, days of noise, days where the old timeline pulls at your ankles. That's okay. That's part of anchoring. You don't punish yourself for slipping. You return. You always return. And the return is faster now. The path is familiar. The signal is strong. You are no longer waiting for the better life. You are living the remembered one. You are no longer manifesting by force. You are becoming by frequency. That you are no longer separate from the field. You are the field folded into form. Welcome back. You never left. You're beginning to see it now, aren't you? Not as a theory or spiritual metaphor, but as a quiet infrastructure humming beneath your life. You are not in the world. You are of it, with it, echoing through it. And that shift from separation to participation rewrites everything. It dissolves the myth that things happen to you and replaces it with a new architecture. Things happen with you. Life is not a stage you walk across. It's a frequency you harmonize with. And when your frequency stabilizes, the stage itself reshapes beneath your steps. Even the idea of fate begins to feel soft. Not gone, but loosened. You sense that some things may be written, but most are woven, actively, quietly, breath by breath. You are no longer looking for your purpose. You are noticing that your frequency is your purpose. That the things you love, the silences you crave, the strange thoughts that move through you like private wind, these aren't distractions. They're instructions. The field doesn't speak English. It speaks energy. And your deepest preferences are how it whispers to you. And so, the way you walk through a doorway begins to change. You don't barge in anymore. You sense the tone of the room. You feel its subtle weather, the mood before words, the unspoken requests behind glances. You bring your signal in like a lantern, not a sword. Not to dominate, but to illuminate. You're not trying to be the loudest. You're practicing coherence. And coherence doesn't shout. It glows. There are fewer arguments now, not because everyone agrees with you, but because you stop vibrating at the frequency of argument. You realize that most conflict isn't about truth. It's about regulation, people trying to stabilize their nervous systems by externalizing chaos. And when you refuse to match that chaos, not by resisting, but by remaining still, something remarkable happens. The conflict collapses, not always, but often. Enough that you begin to trust stillness more than persuasion. You feel your empathy shifting too, no longer the heavy burden of absorbing everything, but a cleaner, clearer perception of patterns. You sense sadness in others, yes, but you no longer drown in it. You witness without becoming. You love without leaking. You start to understand that boundaries are not walls. They are tuning tools. They preserve your signal so it can remain potent. And in protecting your frequency, you end up serving others more deeply. The field begins to teach you about rhythm. You notice that your most profound insights arrive, not when you seek them, but when you soften. You learn to trust rest, not as laziness, but as resonance calibration. There are days when doing nothing is the work, when sitting quietly becomes transmission. You're no longer addicted to effort. You're loyal to timing. And when you move from that place, everything changes speed. You begin to feel a new kind of intimacy, not romantic, not sexual, but frequency-based. A recognition of shared signal. Sometimes it happens in a conversation. Sometimes in eye contact across a room. Sometimes with someone you haven't even met in person, but whose words hit a chord that sings in your chest. These encounters are not random. They are intersections. Your signal invited them, and theirs answered. There is no hierarchy here, only harmony. Your creativity becomes less about originality and more about revelation. You don't try to invent. You tune into what already exists in the field, waiting for someone to notice. Ideas feel like radio signals now. You don't force them. You catch them. And the more present you are, the clearer they arrive. Your job is not to own them. It's to express them cleanly. When ego steps aside, the channel opens. Creation becomes a ceremony, not a performance. You might begin noticing your sensitivity to environments increasing. Rooms that once felt neutral now feel off. Music that once filled space now grates. Certain words, habits, even fabrics begin to feel like dissonance. This is not fragility. This is attunement. You're hearing more, feeling more. And while that might feel overwhelming at first, it's also your new instrument. You are becoming more precise, not more fragile. Sensitivity is not a weakness. It's frequency fluency. Old roles fall away. The one who always helped, the one who always performed, the one who kept the peace. These archetypes unravel, not because they were wrong, but because they were conditional. You no longer live transactionally. You live relationally, to self, to source, to the unfolding moment. You stop asking, "What do I owe?" and start asking, "What is true now?" That single shift dissolves lifetimes of obligation. You begin to feel your ancestors differently, not as ghosts or stories, but as frequencies, codes that live in your bones. Some rise to be healed, others rise to be expressed. You may find yourself weeping without cause, dreaming in symbols you don't recognize, feeling emotions that don't feel entirely your own. That's not trauma, that's signal echo. You are becoming the convergence point of countless timelines. And with every breath of coherence, you rewire them. Even your concept of learning shifts. You stop devouring information. You start digesting experience. Not everything needs to be known. Some things need to be felt, others lived. Your pace slows, not because you're falling behind, but because you're moving in rhythm with the intelligence of the field. Some truths ripen slowly, and you learn to wait for them, not in passivity. In trust, you stop asking for signs. You start becoming one. Your presence begins to say things your words could never contain. People may say, "You feel different," or "Something about you is calming," or "You haven't said much, but I feel seen." That's not flattery. That's feedback. That's the field recognizing itself through you. You are not here to perform magic. You are here to remember it. Eventually, identity becomes less about who you are and more about what you're transmitting. You stop answering questions like, "What do you do?" with job titles. You begin to answer it silently, with frequency. Your life speaks before you do. It vibrates in every room you enter. You don't announce yourself. You arrive. You find joy in strange places. Folding laundry becomes holy. Drinking water feels like communion. Walking becomes meditation. Even pain becomes soft, not gone, but less sharp. You no longer flinch from discomfort. You ask it questions. You learn its texture. You hold it long enough to hear its lesson. That's not suffering. That's awareness with stamina. There's a peace now that doesn't depend on outcomes. You can hold grief without collapse. You can love without demand. You can wait without panic. Not because you've transcended humanity, but because you've anchored into something older than time, your signal, your center, your source. And still, the field continues to surprise you. A song arrives that cracks your chest open. A phrase appears in a stranger's mouth that answers your quiet prayer. A feather falls. A bird stares. A clock repeats a number you needed to see. These are not fantasies. They are conversation. The world is not a machine. It's a mirror. And your frequency is how it speaks. Soon, you'll stop asking, "What should I do next?" You'll start asking, "What wants to emerge through me now?" And in that question lives every answer you ever needed. You notice it more clearly now. The space between stimulus and response, that breath of eternity that opens up before the old pattern snaps shut. You used to think you were impulsive, emotional, reactive. But you see now that what you called reaction was resonance distortion. Your signal distorted by urgency, fear, the need to be understood. Now there's time. Not more of it, but deeper within it. A kind of nested time, hidden between the seconds. You can feel it. And from within that space, You choose not just your words, but your timeline. Even the idea of healing begins to shift. You no longer think of yourself as broken. You see that what you called wounds were not proof of damage. They were pressure points in the field, portals of transformation. You stop trying to heal in the old sense. You begin integrating. The grief isn't something you get rid of. It becomes a tone in your music. The sadness isn't a flaw. It's a thread of depth in your presence. You realize the goal is not to be empty of pain. It's to be whole enough to carry it with grace. Time continues its strange behavior, bending inward, folding back, skipping like a record made of light. You might feel a moment stretch like honey, thick and slow, the present becoming vast. Or maybe an hour disappears entirely, slipping through your awareness as though it never passed. These aren't signs of disconnection. They are artifacts of alignment. Your nervous system is syncing with the larger pulse, and the larger pulse doesn't care about clocks. It cares about coherence. You start noticing you're not as attached to your preferences. Not because you've become indifferent, but because your alignment takes precedence. You used to argue for your positions, favorite foods, beliefs, aesthetics. Now you simply sense. Does this nourish the signal or distort it? Your tastes change without drama. Your values refine without debate. You're not trying to become better. You're just allowing your coherence to guide you. And coherence has no use for posturing. This begins to affect your memory. You forget things you used to cling to. Grievances evaporate. Arguments dissolve. People from the past fade, not because you've repressed them, but because they no longer exist. In the version of you that you're inhabiting, you haven't erased the past. You've simply moved beyond its signal. And what remains is a kind of spaciousness, like a bookshelf cleared of stories that were never truly yours. Sometimes, in the quietest moments, brushing your teeth, tying your shoes, standing in a line, you feel it. A pulse rising through your spine, a subtle shimmer across your skin, an unplaceable emotion that feels like memory and prophecy at once. This is the field reminding you of what you can't always say, but the feeling lingers, like a note still ringing after the music stops. You are not hallucinating. You are harmonizing. And that awareness, even fleeting, leaves residue. The next breath comes easier. The next thought comes clearer. Your relationships continue evolving. Some fall away so gently, it's like fog lifting from a hillside. Others end abruptly, like branches snapping under their own weight. You don't resist this anymore. You've stopped trying to hold on to what your frequency has outgrown. You realize love is not always meant to last. Sometimes love is a tuning, and once tuned, the strings must be released to sing something new. You grieve, yes, but you also bless. And that blessing, silent, sincere, becomes the bridge that leads you forward. You may begin to encounter strangers who feel oddly familiar, not in a romantic or cinematic way, but in a cellular way, like déjà vu in Bone and Blood. Their voice activates something. Their words light up an ancient corridor in your nervous system. These aren't coincidences. They are signal events, frequency rendezvous designed by the field. You don't need to understand them. You only need to honor them. Sometimes the interaction lasts a moment. Sometimes a lifetime. Either way, it's complete. There are new abilities waking in you. Not superpowers, not fantasy. Sensitivities, attunements. You sense when a room has just hosted an argument. You know when someone's smile hides collapse. You feel the edge of a storm long before clouds appear. You don't announce these things. You don't exploit them. You simply let them inform your presence. These sensitivities aren't for spectacle. They're for service, to reality, to truth, to healing. Your inner dialogue transforms. The voice that once criticized begins to soften. You find yourself saying, "It's okay," more often, not as an escape, but as a holding. You become your own witness, your own anchor. You stop asking to be rescued. You realize the rescue is you, the version of you that returned to coherence. And when you find yourself in the spiral, you no longer spiral downward. You spiral inward, into stillness, into signal, into self, and you may start hearing something, not voices, not hallucinations, but layers, subtle, layered hums behind sound, patterns in silence, rhythms beneath language. The field is not silent. It's symphonic. And when your awareness stops seeking words, it starts hearing tones. Some call it intuition. Some call it divine whisper. You might simply call it home. You no longer fear change. You welcome it. Not because you crave novelty, but because change is evidence that your signal is still alive, still adjusting, still listening. You stop asking for certainty. You start asking for clarity. You stop grasping for control. You start dancing with rhythm. And rhythm, unlike control, never betrays you. Soon, even death begins to shift in your awareness. Not as an ending, but as a frequency transition. You no longer dread it. You begin to understand it. You feel how your ancestors didn't disappear. They became the echo. And one day, you too will echo, not as a ghost, but as guidance. And the way you live now determines the quality of that echo. That's not fear. That's sacred responsibility. You live slower now, not out of laziness, but because rushing feels violent. You breathe wider, not because you trained your lungs, but because safety has returned to your body. You laugh more freely, not because everything's funny, but because joy no longer needs a reason. It needs permission. The questions you ask yourself deepen. They are no longer, "How can I get more?" but "What am I truly available for?" Not, "How do I fix this?" but "What wants to emerge through this?" Not, "Who will love me?" but "What part of me still doubts I am love itself?" And in that quiet inquiry, something shifts. You begin to sense that you're not living your life. You're hosting it. You are the field within which the life lives. And the more hospitable you become to truth, to presence, to mystery, the more life pours into you with ease. Not because you're lucky, but because you're aligned. You will still slip. You will still grieve. You will still forget. But now you have a map. Not one made of landmarks, but a frequency. You don't need directions. You need resonance. You don't need answers. You need attunement. And you don't need to be anyone else. You only need to remember the signal you already are. So you return again and again, not to a belief, but to a vibration. Not to a story, but to a sound. Your name might be the same. Your life may look familiar, but your signal has changed. And because of that, everything else must, too. There's something curious happening in the background now. Something difficult to name. Not quite a revelation. Not quite a shift. More like an unfolding. A slow, ancient door, swinging open within you, without effort, without sound. And behind that door, not some grand cosmic answer, just a stillness, a warmth, a knowing that doesn't need to explain itself. You used to chase awakenings like lightning. Now you understand that the real ones arrive like dusk, slowly, gently, and all at once. And you begin to feel the earth differently, not as a stage, but as a participant. You stop walking on her and start walking with her. You sense moods in the soil. You hear rhythm in the trees. You feel the hum of cellular memory when your feet touch the ground. It's not romanticism. It's reconnection. A body has always been a tuning fork for place. The more coherent your inner signal, the more environmental resonance you unlock. The field isn't separate from the forest, and neither are you. Light hits you differently now. Shadows too. You start noticing that the way the sun lands on your skin seems to carry message. That the curve of shadow beneath your chin tells a different story than it used to. Your body is still a body, but it's also an interface. And light, the same light that once simply warned you, begins to feel like code, like instruction. It's not metaphor. It's geometry. You're beginning to see the fractal. The more present you become, the more story fades. Not the stories you love, the ones in books, the ones told around fire, but the story of yourself as limitation. The old myths of unworthiness, of lack, of proving. They don't die violently. They just begin to flicker, like an old signal losing its source. The character you once played still exists, but it's not the only version anymore. You start hearing others, voices beneath the surface, future selves humming from the horizon. Subtle echoes that say, there is more, come deeper. You begin to fall in love with repetition, with the loop, the brushing of teeth, the boiling of water, the folding of towels. You used to resent these things. Now they feel like sacred rhythm, the gentle pulse of the mundane as teacher. You no longer need novelty to feel alive. You need presence. And presence can live in anything. A spoon, a sigh, a doorknob. You start asking not, what's next, but how fully am I here? The world doesn't always respond with ease. Sometimes the deeper your signal, the louder the noise becomes, not as punishment, but as contrast. You are learning to remain coherent, even when the room is filled with static. You are learning to listen inward, even as the outer volume rises. You are not meant to be untouched by the world. You are meant to remain yourself through it. That's what frequency mastery is. Not detachment, but embodied clarity in the storm. You may find yourself speaking less, not out of withdrawal, but out of refinement. Silence becomes precious. You start listening with more than ears. You hear tone, weight, distortion. You sense what was not said, and respond to that instead. Your words, when they come, arrive cleaner, like bells, like medicine. You don't speak to convince, you speak to calibrate. And your language carries weight, not because it's clever, but because it's honest. Even pain becomes a more honest companion. You stop asking, why is this happening? And start asking, what is this showing me? Pain becomes less about punishment and more about feedback. The body aches not to betray you, but to retune you. The heart breaks not to hurt you, but to widen you. The tears fall not to drain you, but to make space. You don't enjoy suffering, but you no longer fear it. You know what to do now. You know how to hold dreams become stranger, less linear, more architectural, rooms folding into other rooms, voices that speak in riddles, landscapes that feel like memory and prophecy fused. You wake not asking, what did that mean? But what frequency was I in while I dreamed? You begin to understand. Your sleep is not escape, it's transit. And what you bring back is not information, it's resonance. Your body continues to change. You eat differently, sleep differently. Sometimes more, sometimes less. You're not following schedules. You're following signal. You stop labeling yourself with absolutes. I'm a night person, you once said. But now, some mornings arrive with ceremony. You thought you hated crowds. But now and then, a room hums with alignment and you belong to it. You're no longer loyal to identity. You're loyal to integrity. And that difference, however small, creates space for evolution. Love evolves too. You stop needing it to validate you. You stop begging it to behave like safety. You stop confusing closeness with ownership. Love becomes less a story, more A frequency, an unconditional, intelligent pattern that you recognize not just in people, but in moments, in clouds, in cracked sidewalks, and the curve of your own aging hand. You don't fall in love anymore. You stand in it. The world, its systems, its noise, its unraveling, doesn't scare you in the same way. Not because it's safe, but because you are. Not because everything is okay, but because you've remembered what remains okay within everything. You may still act. You may still resist injustice. But it comes from signal, not from panic. From clarity, not from trauma. You are no longer flailing. You are tuning. And from that tuning, action becomes precise. You begin to live as if reality is alive, because it is. You greet your home when you return to it. You whisper to your tea as it steeps. You thank your bed for holding you. You nod to the tree each morning. These aren't rituals of superstition. They're rituals of coherence. The field responds to recognition. And the more you recognize it, the more responsive it becomes. There is a part of you, quiet, persistent, that no longer fears being misunderstood. You stop translating yourself into smaller, more palatable frequencies. You speak in your own tone. You walk in your own gait. You dress in your own light. You are no longer dimming to keep others comfortable. You trust their nervous systems to rise or not. Either way, your light remains intact. Some days you still forget. You wake up heavy. The field feels distant. The signal fuzzes. That's okay. That's expected. The spiral includes descent. But now, you don't resist the descent. You remember that even down is a direction. And you go there, gently, without story, without shame. You rest. You listen. And soon enough, you rise again. Not because you fought, but because you waited. This is not the end of your journey. It's not even the middle. It's a harmonic, a soft landing in a new octave of self. The layers will keep peeling. The remembering will deepen. You will keep losing who you thought you were. And in each loss, you will find more space to become. Not someone new, but someone true. The frequency you carry is not temporary. It's ancient. It's you before language. You before story. You before fear. And every time you return to it, even briefly, you leave behind a thread for others to follow. You become map. You become melody. You become medicine. Not because you try, but because you remember. And all of it, began with one strange breath on a strange morning when the air felt different, and you paused just long enough to notice. That breath was the beginning of everything. And now, as everything slows, not to a stop, but to a steady hush, you feel it settle. The signal, the rhythm, the quiet trust that this life is not something you must earn, but something you are finally remembering how to hold. There is no finale, no curtain call, only a deepening, like roots growing quieter as they grow stronger. You're no longer waiting for permission to feel whole. You're no longer postponing your presence. What began as a whisper in your breath is now the hum of your being. And as the world continues, noisy, aching, miraculous, you remain tuned. Not above it, not outside it, but inside it, with your whole self intact. So take one more breath. Not to fix or reach or change, but just to be here in this strange and beautiful now. Let it be enough. Let it be signal. And when you're ready to continue, you will. Until then, rest. Subscribe to our channel so we can meet again next time, and remember, other stories are also waiting for you, quietly humming, ready to awaken the signal you've always carried.